and off we go. Do you want to call on the first speaker, Ross?
I honestly hadn't drifted off there, but it kind of felt like I had drifted off there.
Yeah.
No. So the first person we're going to hear from is Peter at Barnardos. I have been hassling Peter for ages because I've wanted to hear him speak about the amazing stuff that they're doing with WhatsApp, and I know loads of people are looking at WhatsApp at the moment. And so this will be a really interesting one. I'm sure there will be loads of questions for Peter. So Peter, I'll hand over to you if you want to unmute yourself. Don't be an amateur like me and keep yourself on mute.
Cool. Thank you, Ross. So as Ross said, I work at Barnardos, and I'm also joined on the call by Tom Norman, who's the service designer, who's the brains behind the entire WhatsApp thing. I just picked it up and delivered it. So he's on the call and will pipe up if there's bits that I get wrong or insights that he can add. But I think it's an interesting one. The WhatsApp pilot that Barnardos is running is a quite small scale. It's working with less than 20 workers in Portsmouth around in their exploitation, missing and return service, and advocacy service. And Tom did a lot of work with the team down there, mapping out how those services actually work, who's involved at what points, what decisions need to be taken, and those kind of things. And we translated those into a digital process, which is where the guts of it are on WhatsApp. So the communication between the worker and the young person on WhatsApp. But before the WhatsApp conversation starts, we send them a digital welcome pack, which has a biography of the worker and an image of the worker, some information about what consent is in plain English, and just kind of an introduction to what's going to happen when you're talking to Barnardos, because young people who are referred are often confused or don't understand what the purpose of the visit is. And then following that, so that introduction to the service, we introduced a digital service agreement. So rather than the massive legal English written PDFs that are given to the young person when they first meet, which they have to sign without understanding, we broke it down into a three-stage process of what happens before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting, and just covers like a code of conduct around you won't have taken drugs or alcohol, you respect others' opinions and those kind of things. At the end of that, the young person needed to accept those. That was then logged in a Google Sheet, which triggered an email to the admin within the pilot office. And the pilot office would then let the worker know that consent had been given and they could start to communicate on WhatsApp. So that was the kind of off WhatsApp part of it. The on WhatsApp part of it, although we knew that most of the workers would have used it with their five-a-side teams or their family groups or whoever it may be, using it in that context and using it to discuss what could be sensitive topics with a young person, are very, very different propositions. So in the chat, you can see the notes, I think, they've been posted in there. There is I don't know, like an open public folder on the Barnardos Google Drive, which gives the training materials we developed for Android phone users and iPhone users, because they're slightly different things within WhatsApp. And that covers the technical aspects of it, so how to change your settings so images don't download automatically to your camera roll. So if something's shared inappropriately with you, it doesn't then become on your device, and your device doesn't become like legal evidence kind of thing. So feel free to have a look through all of those. And there's also some guidelines, which were mostly Tom's work, which cover like how you should communicate, like what tone you should use. Don't use emojis, don't use GIFs, things that can be misconstrued. But how to set that tone, how to maintain that relationship with the young person. So that's the background of the project. I think it wasn't a simple process to get there. We did quite a lot of work around what risks there may be, and a lot of work with the data protection team within Barnardos. It's it's difficult. WhatsApp is kind of the best of a bad bunch for this kind of work, in my view. We're not using a special version of WhatsApp. It is the standard WhatsApp that everybody gets. The fact that it's encrypted end to end, so the only readable versions of it are on the worker's device and the young person's device, is a real benefit. But there are obviously data issues around potentially sensitive conversations going on within that. So as part of the instruction to the young people, to the workers, we said they should use it for conversation, use it for arranging meetings, use it for building relationship. But if your conversation starts to stray into potentially sensitive areas, then they should pick up the phone or go and see them, or like do it by a more appropriate route. Now, that's obviously been changed quite substantially in the last 3 weeks, given the restrictions on movement the pandemic have brought in. So they have actually been using it as part of their business continuity plan. Given they're the pilot area, they already have access to it. And they're finding it really useful in being able to continue to deliver services. In fact, they've had a case where, this is pre-pandemic, but somebody who was underage and was at risk of exploitation was taken out of the country, back to their country of origin. And without them being on WhatsApp, they would have had no communication with her. But because that connection existed, they could support in the country of origin. They worked with the young person to find resources in country who could support her, and kind of got it to a good resolution, and then handed it over to the in-country team. But I mean, we wanted to use WhatsApp for obvious reasons. It's ubiquitous. It's relatively secure. At the minute, it's really important that it's outside of Barnardos infrastructure, because with the number of remote workers, there's a lot of stress on the infrastructure. So it being outside is great. And we wanted to try and use it to reduce the administration time that the workers had to undergo. So by using WhatsApp, could we streamline the gaining consent process? Could we streamline the service agreement process and automate those to a certain extent? So digital delivery of previously paperwork worked really well. So we are, it's worth saying, we're not mandating that users use WhatsApp. This is where your organization needs to be quite robust, because the terms of use for WhatsApp are 16 plus, even though other companies in the Facebook group are 13 plus, which is based on copper legislation in the US. So we're not mandating that young people use WhatsApp. If an under 16-year-old is using WhatsApp and they want to communicate by that route, then Barnardos took the call for the pilot that we would communicate using WhatsApp. We're looking at that again because we're looking at scaling it up for the current situation. So that may change, but it's not the only service route. It is always in addition to other service routes. So we don't force people to use WhatsApp to get services. They can always text, they can phone, not currently, but they can do face-to-face meetings. So that's where we got to. We went through a couple of prototypes. The information's in the README in the folder. The first one was very lo-fi with a Google form and some Zapier integrations. If you are looking for a quick route to kind of get that process running, then there's some information in there about that. We had a bit more time, so we built something a bit more high fidelity, using FormStack and Pages, using our designs, the Barnardos design system. So there's quite a lot of risks of using it, but there's quite a lot of risks with any digital communication that we found. One thing, I won't go through all of them, but one thing that is worth doing, if video calling is something that's on the cards, having a pre-agreed safe word, because you're not in the room, you don't know who's standing behind the camera, behind the door, or whatever. Having a pre-agreed safe word that's stored somewhere where the worker or if work has changed, they can see it, is really important. So if the young person uses the safe word, and then you know that they're being coerced or observed, then you can change the subject and then follow up with them at a later date on a more secure way. Please don't ask me any questions about GDPR. There is a grey area around GDPR because WhatsApp accesses your contacts as a condition of service, takes the data from your device and then processes it against their list of WhatsApp users. So you can see Dave is, hey there, I'm using WhatsApp. WhatsApp claim they don't process the data. That's the grey area. But in terms of data location, it's within the US or of data centers, but they're covered by the Privacy Shield, so that transfer should be covered. The other element of that is Facebook signed an agreement with the ICO in the UK saying they wouldn't share data between Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp until the ICO was satisfied that they complied with GDPR. I haven't seen anything to tell me that has changed. So the data shared with WhatsApp currently should only be shared with WhatsApp. Whether that will remain the case is another question.
Brilliant. That's really useful, Peter. I don't know, Tom, have you got anything you want to kind of add in terms of how you guys have been doing that?
Yeah, well, I guess, it's one of those things that works in quite an organic way. I think, we know for a fact that lots and lots of services are using WhatsApp kind of under the cover, and particularly right now with the current crisis. We've been pushing quite hard for Barnardos to sort of be able to mandate a rollout for this, and we're hoping we're kind of almost there with that, because it's, obviously it's a lot better for people to use it in a safe way with guidelines, and also where people feel they've got some confidence and support from their organisation to do that. But I think, the interesting thing is that this was being used organically by the service that we're piloting it with anyway. But it fed into a number of insights that the service design team at Barnardos had developed around working with young people, vulnerable young people, who may be missing appointments because of chaotic lives that they live. And the problem was initially framed around the cost to the organisation, and it was a nice piece of work because we managed to reframe what that was to be more around, service workers need to go where young people are, essentially. Service workers need to work around young people, and how can we do that effectively? And we found that this notion of messaging, that it might not be a full conversation, but it could just be a way to make an appointment. It could be a way for a service worker to say, I'm going to be late. It could be a way for a young person to say, I don't feel like meeting today. It can be used on lots of different levels. We realised as well that doing a lot of work with the service workers, we realised that, on paper it looks really good. You can use video, you can use text, you could make a phone call, but actually the video seemed to be the sort of least, the thing that people least wanted to use, particularly in that space of vulnerability, designing for vulnerability. So, I think the interesting thing that we've got to kind of consider with this is right now is digital poverty, in terms of lots of young people stuck in homes that may not have internet connections, and may quite frequently rely on kind of Wi-Fi hotspots around and about to piggyback on for that kind of thing. I think there's some very interesting work that's been done by Nominet and Snook around getting service providers and operators, phone operators, to provide free internet access to NHS services. And I'm hoping that we might be able to expand that out into the space of work with vulnerable communities as well, because I think this is a crucial lifeline. We're also doing work with young care leavers. We've got a co-production program happening at the moment, and just the level of support that we can give young people in this space, particularly isolated young people, is absolutely crucial. And I think these tools are going to really come into their own in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tom. That's really useful and really useful to hear. There's loads of questions been coming in through the group chat. We'll pick those up if you guys are happy to stay on the call. We're going to hear now from Krissie at Scope, because I'm conscious she needs to leave the call a wee bit earlier, and she's going to talk a bit about some of the accessibility stuff. I don't know if she's going to plug it, but if you've not seen it, the Big Hack website that Scope have set up has some really good resources and tools in there that you should go and explore. But I'm sure Krissie will talk a wee bit more about that.
Cool.
Hand you over. Cool.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I only found out about it a couple of days ago, so bear with me. And I've got to be brief because I do have to run off to have a phone call in a bit. But yeah, I think it's fantastic that we're all here together to talk about accessibility and inclusion. My world really is looking at inclusive design and accessibility of digital products and services. So I hope that's useful to you guys today. I know that, well, you probably know if you work in the kind of tech space, that in September 2020, any public sector organisation has to have an accessible website. So that probably applies to quite a lot of you. Now, a lot of stuff that I've been doing is kind of going around to various meetups and different communities and chatting to them about kind of how they've been adopting accessibility and how that's been working for them. I think one sort of main piece of feedback that we get is that it's really hard to know where to start, and there's this kind of looming deadline, but it's like, whoa, like I don't even know what's accessible and what isn't on my website. I don't even know how to kind of assess how accessible it is. In light of that, Scope do have services, so consultancy services that we can offer to support any business who needs to transform their websites and apps to be accessible. But I suppose it's quite timely to be talking to you guys at the moment because of coronavirus. We've really changed the program. Basically, we're kind of more firefighting at the moment because for a lot of disabled people who are potentially in high-risk groups, there's no longer an offline alternative to everyday products and services. So this is a huge issue for people who have access requirements, because now the only way that they can live their lives is from home, through the internet. And when there are huge access barriers, stopping you from working, from buying your food, from booking appointments you might need, from planning things, from watching, receiving entertainment online, it's going to have a huge impact on people's lives. So what we have done is we have set up a page on the Big Hack website, which I'll share with you, which essentially any one of you can pop in your website and we will do a light touch audit. So that's the page. We've had loads of people submit their websites, so we're quite busy, but you guys do have till September, so we've got a while to get back to you guys. I just think it's worth taking up the opportunity. We are prioritizing based on kind of how crucial organizations are to the public at the moment. So we've had certain NHS hospitals submit their websites, and obviously that kind of went to the top of the pile because that information is really important. But yeah, so I mean, do make use of that offer that we have there. And I guess, like, in terms of accessibility, like working in this for a while, there's some really clear priorities that you guys can start off looking at. One of the first things I would advise anyone who wants to know how accessible their website is just to unplug your mouse and just use the keyboard to tab through your website. So for a lot of people, due to a number of reasons, keyboard accessibility is going to be really, really important, and they won't be using a mouse. It might be because they have motor disabilities, they might be blind, so they use a keyboard to navigate their screen reader through a page. Some people have tremors which don't allow for fine muscle control. Others have little or no use of hands. And as a result, tabbing through a website is going to be the main way that they navigate. So that would be my top tip. Also, it's really eye-opening. So you can see that when you tab through your website, sometimes you end up becoming completely trapped, and you can realize how frustrating it is for someone using that to navigate. So holiday booking websites are quite interesting to look at, because often you'll get trapped on the date picker. So literally then you're just stuck in the website and there's no point in using it. So I guess that's kind of one top tip. Another one which I think doesn't really get talked about enough, which is the content that you're writing. And I think that's really important at the moment, because if you're anything like us, we are frantically putting together content around how our customers might be affected by coronavirus, and how they can mitigate that, and where they can reach services and support, etc. So for content, we're all brought up to write really elaborate, flowery content. It's celebrated. You know, I studied English at uni, and basically kind of the more elaborate and Jane Austen sounding, the better. So that's a real no-no when someone just needs information quickly, and they're probably on your website looking for something. So what we do is across Scope, using something called Hemingway app. I will just type it into the chat. And I mean, it doesn't give you kind of everything you need, but it is a really fantastic resource, because what you can do is you can write your content, you paste it into Hemingway, and it will just flag up anything that's really difficult so the average reading age in the UK is age 9. So anything kind of age 9 or above, it will flag up. It will flag up if you're using the passive voice, you should use the active voice. It will flag up if sentences are too complicated. So that's really useful. I'd encourage you to use that, and you can start, any essential information on your websites, you can start pasting that into Hemingway and taking a look, and there's some really quick fixes that you can make. In terms of the Big Hack program itself, we have kind of a number of audiences. Our main audience is product teams in any business. So that's people who are building websites, designing content, etc. And I think what we're trying to do really with that is trying to make accessibility accessible. I used to be in a digital team, and when we heard the word accessibility, we all kind of ran a mile, because no one wanted to be the one to have to decipher WCAG, which is WCAG. Google it, and it's very boring, it's very long, it's quite tough to understand and navigate. It's an amazing piece of work, but it is challenging for your average Joe who sort of comes across accessibility. If you're anything like me, you fell into digital, so you're not embedded in that world, but you're very much at the forefront of it. So the Big Hack has a number of resources which we hope to make accessibility and accessible. So Big Hack, I hope that's the right one. So that's our resources hub, and it also has stories from disabled people. And they're really powerful, because they actually tell anyone who's reading what it's like to navigate the internet when you're blind, or when you have a cognitive impairment, or when you're deaf, for example. And I think getting close to those stories really helps you understand how frustrating it really is. On top of that, we crowdsource disabled people's feedback on the online world. And what we've done is we've designed a very gorgeous analytics platform that is super accessible, which we're really proud of, which basically kind of gives all the crowdsourcing information that we've gathered into an analytics tool. The analytics tool is quite fun if you just want to see what people are saying, but also it can be quite useful if you're lobbying internally in your own organisation for accessibility to be prioritised, because there's tons and tons and tons of qualitative feedback that people have been giving us, basically telling their stories of where kind of accessibility has stopped them paying their bills, for example, which is really big. So that's really useful. You can also Google any business kind of, or anything. You can search, use the search bar in there, and you can find what people are saying. So you could search within that analytics platform for your own organisation or any other major organisations and see what people are saying. That has had around 400 and something responses, but we're going to be putting a big marketing spend behind it. So we'll be getting a lot more responses across the year. I'm seeing loads of fantastic stuff that people are sharing on here. So thank you very much for that. I guess from kind of my perspective, the last thing I'd just mention is if you do want to be updated on what the Big Hack is doing, any work that we're doing with businesses, any campaigns you've got coming out, any kind of free audits or advice that we can offer, I would recommend you sign up to our newsletter, which you can do. I think it's all over the website where you can sign up. So do take a look and sign up, and we can update you and support you if needed. So thank you.
Brilliant, that's really useful, Krissie, thank you. Some amazing resources on that site, so that's great that they're all available. Okay, we're going to move on to the next speaker now. So we're going to hear from Aaron Slater, who works in the SCVO digital team. So Aaron's going to be talking about the No One Left Behind programme, which the Scottish Government and a range of partners are involved in. But I guess that broader issue of digital inclusion, both in terms of skills, devices and connectivity. So I'll hand you over to Aaron just now.
Thanks, Ross. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Aaron Slater. I'm Digital Participation Manager at SCVO. So my role is really around supporting programmes of work aimed at helping people get the most out of being online and actually getting meaningful benefit from being online. A lot of the work that we do is around supporting organisations to develop projects and embed a culture of digital inclusion and how they support their users. So that's kind of the focus of what I want to talk about today. And some of the key principles really that you can take away from the call to help you with your response to promoting digital inclusion, and also provide a bit of an update around some of the emerging work we're involved in with No One Left Behind in Digital Scotland. I really talk about accessibility probably in the wider sense, not necessarily accessibility in terms of devices, but how we make being digitally included more accessible and how we use the people that we work with and see digital as a kind of one of the solutions being the people. So we know really that there's three kind of key barriers to being online for people, and that's access to a device at home, having the appropriate connectivity, whether that's through broadband or mobile data, and having the skills, motivation and confidence to then be able to use that device and connectivity to get that meaningful benefit from being online. In the context of coronavirus, there are significant new challenges for how we promote and enable digital inclusion work across Scotland. It's forced us to rethink a lot of the service delivery models that we have, which we've traditionally focused on using community settings and community groups, and really we're losing out, I suppose, on opportunities as well for, someone else mentioned those public Wi-Fi spots as well around connectivity. So there are increased challenges around doing digital inclusion work and getting more people online. But over the last few weeks, we've been involved as part of a coordinated response across public, private and voluntary sector as part of the No One Left Behind programme, which Ross is involved in as well, and I know our colleagues from More Collective are on the call as well. The aims of that project really to accelerate levels of digital inclusion in Scotland, and the levels of digital exclusion have really been magnified through coronavirus and the lockdown that everyone's going through at the moment, and thinking about how digital exclusion really exacerbates social exclusion and what we can do about that. Kind of in a nutshell, the key aims of the programme are to find those that are digitally excluded, and that's coordinating efforts across NHS, local government, voluntary sector, getting devices to them. We want to try and have some sense of universality in terms of devices. I'm going to talk about the training in a little bit. That's just to supplement or support how we're going to deliver that training. Make sure that the devices have connectivity. So probably initially looking at 4G SIM cards, but thinking longer term beyond the initial response about how we sustain the legacy of the programme and think about better home connectivity for people. And provide a national network of digital champions or digital buddies to support the skills, motivation, confidence side of what we want to do, because it's all fine and well giving someone a device which is connected to the internet, but if they've never been online before or have certain fears about the internet, that's a useless task because they need that support to help them get online. So that's kind of No One Left Behind in a nutshell. It is a huge piece of work we're really proud to be involved in, but a piece of work we also realise is probably going to take a considerable amount of time due to the scale and coordination required. I'll come on to that again at the end of what I'm going to say, just in terms of kind of next steps and an ask from you guys in terms of what we might be looking for in the next few weeks and how you can contribute and also benefit from the programme for your users. But first of all, I suppose my kind of key tips around digital inclusion. So I've got a few things, kind of principles, I suppose, more than anything that you could probably take away from this call. And the first one is to be a digital champion. Some of you might be aware of what the concept of a digital champion is. Digital champions are traditionally staff or volunteers in organisations working in the community who aren't IT experts because they don't need to be. They're not from the IT team, they're frontline staff doing community-facing work, and they've got a passion for digital, and they have the ability to use the trusted relationships they have with the people they work with to get them interested in digital to understand the benefits, and to help kind of over time do little bursts of activity with them to help them build up their motivation and confidence to be online. So any role in an organization that is front facing, that has direct contact with users, those are the roles that really someone who would be good as a digital champion, that's the kind of role they might be in. So we're currently working with Irene and Shona from More Collective on what training for digital champions for your organizations looks like in this new landscape of isolation and lockdown, and how we can, through No One Left Behind, deliver support to your organizations around upskilling your staff to become digital champions and what that looks like, and to deliver that remotely whenever you can't get one-to-one, face-to-face access to people you work with for the most part. Second key tip would probably be to find the hook. So we quite often talk about motivation is one of the biggest barriers, along with affordability. A lot of people just don't see a benefit to being online, and also we have to accept a lot of people just don't want to be online, and that's absolutely fine. It's not about forcing it on people that just genuinely don't want it, but letting people see the potential benefits and tapping into their interests, which is again where, if you've got staff on the front line who have those relationships with your users, they'll be well placed to understand what the potential hook might be. So an example I quite like was from Big Hearts. It's one of the organizations we've worked with. They did some work with some of their older users around using the internet, using Google Maps to go and look at different parts of Edinburgh that they've never seen in maybe 30, 40 years, and be able to revisit those through Google Maps, through Street View, or put together YouTube playlists of songs they haven't heard in a while. So just thinking about what are the interests, because people really need to be able to address their own interests to be able to develop further skills in using the internet. Also, probably addressing fears is a good principle to take away. We've all got our own fears and prejudices around being online, and that's especially true for someone who's never been online. Fears about their online safety, about having their identity stolen. Friends and family have fears for their loved ones as well. So thinking about what people's fears are and being able to have an open discussion about those fears, and also thinking about frontline staff, again, understanding the needs of the people they're working with, and then being best placed to understand how to navigate some of those fears, and actually thinking about the risks as well associated with that. Also linked into fears, I would say it's not just your users, it'll be your staff as well. And staff have a lot of fears. They have fears about also increasing vulnerability and risk for the people they're working with. So it's applying those same principles that we're using with all the new digital platforms we're going on to, doing that kind of risk assessment around what is the risk level for this person. I know my colleague Siobhan's on the call as well. Siobhan did a really nice piece of work on her One Digital website, which is a UK-wide partnership we're part of. And she did a really nice comparison around online safety versus safety in the real world. And that's a really nice way to be able to articulate keeping yourself safe online compared to the real world. And I'll share the link to that after I finish speaking. My last key tip is probably just keeping it person-centered, which I think is hopefully what's been coming out of everything else I've said. So understanding what that person's interests are. So we would say start with the foundations. A lot of the work we do is based on the Essential Digital Skills Framework. That's a UK-wide framework, and there's 5 key kind of essential digital skills. And kind of sitting within the middle of that is your foundation skills. So they're the basics, like, do you know how to turn on a device? Can you interact with the home screen? Do you know how to adjust the volume settings? So it's not making assumptions and not being judgmental if someone's never done that before. It's being patient and being able to talk someone through the basics of using the device. So we'd say start with that, don't make assumptions, and then maybe pick 1 or 2 of the key essential skills, but make sure they're skills that are linked to the interests of that person. And especially in the landscape in which we're all working right now, thinking about what would be maximum benefit or a quick win for that person. Would it be learning how to do video calling? Would it be learning how to do online shopping, if you can get a delivery slot, that is? What 1 or 2 key takeaways and quick wins could we get from this interaction? And taking the lead from that person in terms of what it is they want to get out of it. And that gives them a lot better chance then of continuing their learning journey. So again, I'll post a link to the framework for that and some of the skills. We're actually creating a stripped back version of the checklist that we usually use. We've stripped it back in the context of coronavirus and being in self-isolating, just to make it a bit more, just kind of some of the key requirements. So in terms of next steps in the next few weeks around the No One Left Behind stuff, we'll hopefully be putting out a call via digitalparticipation.scot, which is the digital inclusion website that we administer on behalf of Scottish Government. We'll be calling on organisations to sign up for, I suppose, a referral pathway into No One Left Behind, but also to sign up and make commitments under the Digital Participation Charter to upskill a certain amount of your staff as well to become digital champions. We're going to be doing that work with Ross, with Irene and Shona and More Collective around remote delivery for staff and help them get some of the basics around remote support for people to help them get online. So look out for that in the coming weeks. I'll leave you also with the link to our Slack community. So I know some of you recognize some of the names are part of our Slack community. We've got over 300 members now, and it's a space to discuss digital inclusion work, to share ideas and resources with one another. So if you're not there, I'll pop the link in the comments so you can join that and contribute to that conversation. But I think that is the gist of what I wanted to say. Yeah, I'll pop all the links on the comment section now.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Aaron. That's really useful. Okay, we're going to have our final speaker, and then we'll have a chance for kind of questions and discussion. So the final person we're going to hear from today is Christine Harrison from RNIB Scotland. Christine, if you want to unmute yourself and jump on.
Excellent, thanks very much. Yeah, so I'm from RNIB, and during, I suppose, this time, there's been like 4 major issues for people with sight loss. The first being things like access to food and medication. Even people who normally have independence and even digital independence are finding, it's more difficult to get online and get your shopping, and difficult to be out. Some of the pathways that they normally use to get things are kind of closed now. The other things are difficulties with social distancing, and also eye care, because all of that kind of stuff is sometimes been put on hold, or sometimes it's quite difficult to access. But a big one that I can really talk about more is social isolation. Just because everybody's feeling socially isolated, and one of the ways that we are trying to mitigate that is with technology. So I'm from RNIB's Technology for Life team, and we operate around the whole of the UK, but we do do a lot of work with our colleagues in Scotland. And I know that as part of the emergency going on, there's been a lot of welfare calls to people, and trying to help them with all those various issues that they have, as well as trying to problem solve for them how they can keep in touch with family, how they can access things, but also how they can just keep themselves going. And one of the big things that my team manages is our grants system. People with sight loss can access our grants program, and we have kind of opened it up a bit as well, in terms of devices, but also in terms of who can apply and how they apply, made it a bit simpler. And that's been really helpful. So it's given people access to braille readers, to they could use it towards an iPhone, or anything so they can access the internet. Obviously, there are issues with just giving someone a device. As Aaron was saying, it's not just getting a device to people, it's actually having them embrace it, having them want it and need it, but also training them how to do it. So luckily we do have a team that does that, our Technology for Life team. And we have a national helpline that all of our services, all of this information, by the way, is in the Google Doc. So we've got a national helpline that people can contact, and then if they are wanting specific help with technology, and that ranges from interest in devices, or it could be actual training in a device, or setting up a new device. So normally we would have a whole host of volunteers all around the country that could go out and actually physically help, go around and do a home visit. But obviously we can't do that now. So we are currently I suppose retraining some of our volunteers. It's a very different skill set to help over the phone than it is to do it in person. So they might have a more limited array of skills that they can offer, but obviously we can get volunteers from anywhere phoning up and providing support. We do also have a set of specialist, well, I call them specialists, they don't like that, but they are blind or partially sighted people who are users of the technology. So if it's something really advanced, or quite involved, and you really need to know it inside out and be a user, then we've got people that can do that as well. So we are trying to give a kind of holistic approach to technology, but some of our other services are able to kind of pick up where we can't, I suppose, because we are still our sight loss advice service, our talk and support kind of colleagues are running like phone groups and things like that. You don't necessarily have to be online to access some of this stuff, and we are trying to put people in touch with the right people, and also in touch locally. So there's a lot of kind of referring and consulting, but generally there's a few different ways that people can get help. But yeah, there's quite a few other useful things. For example, we've made our news agent free for people with sight loss at the minute, so they can actually access news. And there's things like, we do have like a skill on the Echo that people can use to access our newsagent services and things like that. And of course, like at the minute, our Talking Book service, which is free to all people who can't read print, usual print, that is also available to people. So so yeah, I've kind of run out because I was going to talk more about accessibility. I have, but that's kind of already been covered, I think, quite a lot. There is a link to sight advice FAQ, which is a really handy website that we use ourselves, really, if we're not sure about something. So aside from the stuff that Krissie was talking about with regards to accessible websites, there's some other things on there with regards to things like accessible documents and presentations that people might find useful. It just gives us a few pointers towards how you can make stuff like that if you're giving out information and you want to include things like you know, for example, I don't know, a good example is if you try and tab through the email application form for PBG that's been put out, you'll probably find you won't get very far, and things like that. Some of the documents that are flying around aren't necessarily accessible, so it's good to kind of bear that in mind. So and we're always happy to help with stuff like that. And also, I would say, with our helpline, it's not just for our customers. Like, other people can phone, like professionals or people from other organisations. If you're phoning on behalf of someone with sight loss, please use it, because that's why it's there.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Chris. That's really useful. Just say some of the resources that you mentioned have been put into the chat. So Jen's been adding them in as you've been going. So if people want to scroll back, you'll be able to pick up those. Peter from Barnardos needs to leave the call at 3. So I was just going to ask if there's any kind of questions that have come in for Peter that haven't been addressed in the chat box yet. Jen, is there anything that has come in for Peter?
Yep, we've got a question from Nikki Wilson. What's been the biggest difference in terms of outcomes that you've observed so far in comparison to other ways of working?
So I think probably, well, there's pre-lockdown and during lockdown. I think we were struggling to get adoption pre-lockdown, just because it's a new way of working and cultural and technology issues. Now we're getting feedback from the staff and the management down there saying that it is allowing them to continue services, which is fairly fundamental. So outcomes wise, yeah, there's many things under that umbrella of services, but it is, yeah, without it they would struggle to continue to deal with the young people. So yeah, it's having very positive outcomes. That's a bit of a crap answer, but yeah.
I admire your honesty. Any other questions that came in for Peter or for Tom from the chat?
I think Peter's been answering some questions in the chat, actually.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Anyone else wanting to ask? And just to say, if you want to ask a question, you don't need to just put it in chat. You can raise your finger. If you don't have your video turned on, obviously I don't know if you've raised your finger. I know that sounds obvious, but just so you're aware of that. Okay. I'm conscious you need to
Samuel Buckley's got his finger up there.
Okay. Oh, I didn't see him. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah. Hello. I'm actually from a community resilience group, and I suppose there's been a lot of issues talking about those digitally excluded, and it's something we've been considering. There's a lot more safety considerations when it's randomers turning up at people's doors, but it's the issue that people are most in need are either disabled or got economic deprivation or any other issues, and it's just a case of is there any charities reaching out to those or flagging those that we could help, or how is that issue being broached?
Can I just check then, Simon, was that a question, I guess, a question for Peter, or was that a more open question about inclusion maybe for Aaron?
More for probably Aaron on their SCVO.
Okay.
Like, is there a way of is there a way of identifying those that are digitally and physically excluded at the minute and isolated, and other ways of working with those people?
Yes, so there's one of the work streams in the No One Left Behind project is looking at identifying those that are digitally excluded and where that intersects with lower income or people living in poverty and social exclusion, which is actually a mammoth task to try and get that right and try and make sure that resources are going to those that need it most, and have some level of prioritization in terms of there's a finite amount of resource that you can put into this project and making sure it's used as efficiently as possible. So although I'm not specifically involved in that work stream, we do have colleagues, I think it is colleagues from the Health Service and Scottish Governments working on that aspect of it, looking to identify that. So there is basically an effort to make sure that we do identify the right people, but it's looking at different data sets, getting information from local authorities, from Scottish Government, and then also I think part of the phased approach we'll be asking community-based organisations who we know have connections with those people as well to identify them and make the referrals for them as well. So it's trying to make sure we don't miss anyone, and make sure that the resources that go out to those that really need it the most. So there is a bit more work to be done on that, because it's not a simple, not a straightforward process, but there are people working on it. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's, I think, as much as I've got on that.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, just say as well, we've got someone from Leeds, Scotland, who's going to come in and talk a wee bit about some of the work that they're doing at the moment, which is quite interesting. Now I'm scrolling through the 6 pages of users who are in here and can't find who was from Leeds, Scotland.
Hi, that's me.
John, hello.
Hi, yeah, I'm Sybil from Leeds, Scotland.
Hi,
Yeah.
Sybil.
So over the next till September, 5 months, we're going to be running in total 20 webinars on supporting other people to be safe online. And it's they're going to be the audience for them is practitioners, maybe volunteers, people that are sort of working directly with service users, who may not feel, they might have a device, they might have a device, they might have Wi-Fi, but they may be just worried about using their device safely, especially now that they're sort of forced onto having to do online shopping and talk to people online that they would usually talk to face to face. And why these webinars, we're trying to sort of fill the need to give this information and help retrain people and support people when it comes to them supporting people with specific impairments, especially learning impairments, dyslexia, maybe low literacy. So it'll be sort of geared around that particularly, because often the advice that you get on online safety often doesn't take that into account. A lot of the advice, that's specifically what we're sort of trying to focus on. So yeah, you can we'll have 20 webinars. We've got 2 coming up in the next few weeks. The links are in the chat, and they're also on the Google Doc. But we'll have more coming up, so just like keep an eye on our Twitter and everything. Thanks.
Brilliant, that's really useful. Thank you for that. So we'll make sure. So as I said, they're in the Google Doc, they're in the chat as well. We'll tweet out some of those links afterwards too. Just to say that Krissie from Scope also had to leave the call a bit earlier. She was jumping another call at 3, but she's put loads of really good resources in the chat box. Siobhan is also working on a blog post which is pulling together some of this kind of best practice stuff, so that'll be out soon as well, and we'll get that link out to people. Any questions specifically for Aaron in terms of, I guess, that bigger digital inclusion piece? And both, I guess, keeping in mind that some of you will be based in Scotland, but I guess just the kind of UK-wide picture as well.
I think Stephanie Ann had a question in chat about how excluded people would be identified in the involvement of local communities.
That's a good question, yeah.
Yeah, I was just reading that question. So part of No One Left Behind, we're moving to a bit of a pilot and testing phase in the next couple of weeks. And I suppose to start with, one of the general principles is we're starting with a very basic general suite of resources, which are universal, and accept that sometimes you run the risk of universal resources actually serve no one. So what we're going to do is start with that, and Irene and Shona Moore have been great in building that up. And during the pilot stage, an initial bit of testing with Glasgow Disability Alliance, and built into that an element of co-production as well to start to unpick some of the more specific issues around that. And then as we kind of progress the project forward, we've got connections with some groups. And if you're a group that you work with a group with specific needs, please do get in touch with us, because we really want to hear you, and we do need to hear from you to help us build out the suite of resources that we're building, and embed as much co-production in the process as we can to make sure that it is really relevant and accessible and useful for different groups. And again, that's why we kind of use the digital champions model, because we're not the specialists in working with the groups that you work with. You guys are, and your users should feed into that process. So please do get in touch with us. I would say the Slack workspace is probably the best starting point, to put stuff in there, and we can pick up from that and move on with that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Aaron. And as well, I guess just to give some context, as we're talking about work that would usually take place over the course of probably years, never mind months, and now that's taking place over the course of weeks to be rolled out. So stuff is happening very, very quickly and changing fairly rapidly. So that pilot should give a really good insight into terms of, you know, what does this look like? What training do people need? But right down at the kind of micro level of, you know, if we give people devices, how do we push the right apps to the device without the person to sign up for the Google Play Store? And that level of detail has been looked at the moment. So it's a very, very big piece of work that's happening at a real kind of pace. So there's some really interesting stuff coming out from SCVO, and there's updates coming out all the time in terms of what that looks like. Okay. Any other questions for any of our speakers, Jen, that have come in from chat? Any speakers who are
I
left?
think Amanda's got her finger up.
Okay. Amanda, do you want to jump in? Unmute yourself and jump in.
Thank you. Yeah, hi. My name's Amanda Eleftheriades, and I'm from the Clydeside Creative. We run a community magazine in Western Bartonshire. And it's a question actually for Christine. How, or is it possible to get content publications to you to be turned into talking books? Because we've got put together a kind of mini mag version with a lot of sort of localized information resources, which we're getting created as a PDF, but we're also getting a small print one carried out as well, which we're distributing with our community partners. But we would like to be able to do a version which is an audio version as well, if that is possible.
Yeah, I mean, our transcription services do that all the time. I'm not entirely sure about if there'd be a cost involved and things like that, but I can certainly share a link to them, and you can see what they say, or they might just give you tips on how to produce a suitable audio file or something like that. So
perfect, thank you.
There. No worries.
Just to say as well, the Google Doc link which Jen has shared, you can add your contact details on there. So if anyone wants to exchange contact details to make those kind of connections, you can do that. Okay. I also noticed Isla from Glasgow Disability Alliance is on the call. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, Isla, in terms of what GDA are doing.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, I kind of wanted to link in actually with Samuel, what you'd asked. Did you say you're from the resilience, one of the volunteer resilience networks?
All right, just unmute myself. Yeah, the Edinburgh Coronavirus Support. So it's mainly based on Facebook. So there's about 9,000 people in there. We broached onto Twitter to try and link up with people, but yeah. So we're trying to reach people who are isolated as well, but also the linking with the charities for the volunteers.
Yeah, because I was really glad you'd asked that question, because that's been a really big part of what our response has been in Glasgow. We're member led. We're run by disabled people in Glasgow, and we've got 5,000 members, but we're mainly based around bringing people together physically in kind of events and face-to-face learning, and we've got quite a mixed bag in our membership of people who are very, very digitally savvy, and then quite a lot of people who are not really interested, or would not think that they were interested, and then everybody in between. So but we've definitely found we've been surveying all of our members and phoning, basically just working our way through 5,000 people by phone, and we've got the online survey, but we tend to be going through it by phone, and it's really starkly highlights the kind of information gaps that people have if they aren't online, or even just if they're very isolated and maybe they only have a radio, or even if they only watch the TV news. That not knowing kind of what information is relevant to themselves, and not having any idea about any of the resilience networks that are so ubiquitous if you are online and you're seeing so much of it. So we've been making loads of referrals to all the Glasgow volunteer networks, and yeah, I hope that's been working for you guys over in Edinburgh as well, linking in with folk that are kind of in phone contact, I suppose, with people who are not going to find that information otherwise. But yeah, we're also kind of hoping, it's kind of prompted us to be obviously doing things a lot differently in the same way it's done that for everyone so far. But I think there's an opportunity here. We're seeing how it goes, I suppose, linking in with Aaron and the No One Left Behind crew for part of their pilot. But kind of hopeful that actually for a lot of the people who would maybe be quite who maybe wouldn't see the relevance, or maybe really lack the confidence or the motivation, that actually this kind of crisis point where your isolation is even greater than it normally would be. We're hoping it will motivate or spark that interest in people that might not otherwise be. So it's a really, really good opportunity in amongst a lot of chaos and difficult stuff. Obviously, it's a good time, and huge amounts of momentum, as you said, Ross, as well. That things are going more rapidly than I've ever seen any public or third sector organisation kind of just flinging ourselves into it, try and get things moving. So it's really encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Any other points or questions from anyone who's on the call? Any other fingers up? Let's see. Irene from More Collective, I know you're on the call just now. I don't know if you've got, like, maybe say 3 top tips in terms of people who are going to be working with users who maybe traditionally engage face-to-face or on the phone, and now are having to engage more online. Any advice for people working with users who fall into that kind of quite specific category?
I think my top tips would probably be very similar to those kind of highlighted by Aaron. It's about starting where people are at, so understanding the sort of point of access for them, and making it person-centered as quickly as you can, understanding their fears really, and validating those fears, because people who are offline have a whole list of complex fears very similar to those of us that are online, but we're managing that risk. For instance, privacy and security. And so it's about kind of validating fears and talking about that kind of risk assessment process really, and then helping them move forward with the stuff that they want to do first. And I think all of that in the context of COVID-19 is quite tricky. It was great hearing Isla point out that people who are offline aren't accessing the sort of community resilience groups, and so that would be a big priority for people, is getting them into that. So it's really yeah, I guess those would be my top tips. It wasn't 3, it was a kind of garbled mess.
Sorry, I don't know why I picked 3. I just, like, off the top of my head, decided you're going to give us.
It's to shut me down, make sure I didn't keep
totally,
yakking.
Exactly. Not at all. Okay. Anyone else got any points or questions that they'd like to make? Any experience from your own service that you'd like to share in terms of accessibility or inclusion? Okay. One thing I'm going to point out, because I've been impressed in it the whole call and nobody's mentioned it, is Claire McGinley has the best Zoom background of any person I've ever seen in a Zoom call. That is quite spectacular. Well done, Claire. You don't win a prize or anything, just out of respect for that.
Admiration. Yeah.
John, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add in.
I think one thing I was going to say is, I think be ready to get it wrong and be open to people telling you this isn't working. Because I think these days there's so many tools available to make information easily accessible. It's not as expensive or difficult as it used to be. So it's really valuable to make yourself open to service users, so proactively ask for their feedback and understand how they're using it, because you won't get it perfectly right first time, but if you're open to that input, then you can hear from your users and understand how to revise your systems. And something as really simple as making sure your contact page has got an easily locatable phone number, so making sure that's something that somebody with a screen reader could access. That gives you that extra channel. People can come back into your service and make contact if they're having difficulty with using something you're trying to provide online. So it's that kind of basic thing, I think, can help you reach everyone that you're trying to provide for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think Krissie kind of touched on that as well. This, like, accessibility can feel like a really big job and it feels insurmountable. So rather than doing something small and starting somewhere, people just don't do anything because it feels like such a colossal task. So thinking about these small kind of pieces of work that you can do, and some of those links that we shared in the chat earlier should help with that. Ashley wants to come on and talk about the young person service that they're delivering online. Ashley, do you want to unmute yourself and tell us a wee bit about that?
Yep. So hi, my name's Ashley. I'm from Enable Scotland. We are delivering a programme called Stepping Up Live, which is for young people who are transitioning from school, who might require some additional support. It is for young people who have additional support needs, but we're not operating a medical model. So if you have any young people that are particularly struggling or who would need some specialist transitional support, we have a team all across Scotland who can support them. So all they would have to do is drop us an email to steppingup@enable.org.uk, and then one of the team can give them a call back. We can use Skype, WhatsApp, Facebook, Zoom, Teams, any of those things in order to speak to them. So we can offer transitional support. We have a suite of training materials, including some online digital skills that we are going to start delivering as of next week. We're also doing ILF applications for young people. That's Independent Living Fund, and lots of our young people are getting laptops or getting some computer equipment. So if you've got any young people that want to access that, you can let us know, and we can get back to them.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Ashley. We've put your email address to steppingup@enable.org.uk in the chat, so if anyone wants to get in touch and refer people on, we can do that as well. Okay, any final points? I'm conscious we're going to finish up about past, but we might finish up a wee bit earlier. Any other final projects we want to talk about, or any questions we've got for remaining speakers? Okay, just let you know the next talk, the next chat that we've got is going to be the 23rd of April. It's at 4 p.m. this time, so that's next Thursday. I keep getting days of the week wrong at the moment because days of the week are just a meaningless concept now. So 23rd of April, 4 p.m, we've got Beth Cantor coming on. So for those of you who don't know about Beth, Beth is probably the world's leading person in terms of non-profit digital work. She's been doing this for over a decade and a half. She's written numerous books on subject matters. We're very, very lucky to have her join us. And it's going to be an Ask Me Anything. So when you fill out the form, there's a question in the form where you can ask Beth the question. And she's going to be particularly focused on how you work online, and that's a lot of what she's been doing over the last few years, and she's written a book about the subject matter, so who better to bring on and talk about that. So that's quite an exciting one. John, anything you want to talk about before we finish up?
Yeah, I guess just to recap, what we try to do with the calls is collect together all the insights we've had on the call. So a recording of the call will be available on Third Sector Lab's Facebook page. We've got our new podcast. We're 3 episodes in now. That's called Did You Listen? And that's on Spotify and the usual places. And also on the SCVO website, what we try and do each week is get at least 1 or 2 blogs together highlighting the issues. So this week we'll be looking at both accessibility and inclusion. Just trying to pick up the key links that have been shared. So keep an eye on our social media channels for that. And what we're also looking to do is to understand what ways we can support people in their digital journey. So we know that these calls are helpful. We also offer free 15-minute consultations for organisations if they want to run through an issue in a bit more depth. We'll put links to that on our social media channels as well. But basically come and tell us, we all know that we're having to learn a lot very quickly. So just tell us what ways would be good ways for your organisation to get support, and we'll try and do that. But we know that these calls are helpful because they get large numbers of people together. But we have got channels where you can raise more in-depth topics if you want to do that as well. So just be in touch.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. Actually, I forgot to mention that about the kind of more in-depth work that we're doing. We've got this Friday, if you work in the Violence Against Women and Girls field, so if you work for a Rape Crisis Centre or if you work for one of the women's aid centres across the UK, we've got a call specifically for professionals working in those sectors. So we've got about, I think, 75 people come on that call, and we've got people from those services sharing some of the work that they're doing to deliver those services digitally, and some of the kind of key areas around managing risks and the platforms that people are choosing. So if you're interested in that, we've got, I think there's a link, in fact the link's just gone on, Jen's just shared that link in the chat there, and you can apply to join that call. You need to sign up for a work email address for obvious reasons. We've kept it quite tight, and the privacy settings are quite secure on that one. Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully see lots of you on the call on the 23rd. The idea behind these is we'll be running these weekly, so you can come back to anyone's. The subject matter will change every week. We do need to get a name for them, so if you didn't see the link before, we've got a Twitter poll at the moment. We need a name we can't just keep calling them the big charity digital Zoom. Maybe we can. That is one of the options you can vote for. So if you've got a more sensible name, you can stick the suggestions in there or vote for some of the other ones that are in there too. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll see you next week. Catch you later on. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop recording now.
Great.